Sawanan, please let me go. I didn't do anything to you. The boy's voice trembled. Tears rolled down his pale cheeks. You think just because your daddy is rich, you can do anything? The tall teenager growled, pushing the child so hard he fell to the ground. Now we'll show you that daddy's money won't help here. Jackson watched from his hiding place under an old oak tree. He saw 4 teenagers surrounding a small boy who clutched his backpack to his chest in terror. Jackson's hand clenched into a fist. Hey! His voice cut through the air like a knife. Leave him alone! The gang leader turned around, his face contorted with rage. What if you're a tramp? Call the police? He laughed, but there was fear in his laughter. Jackson slowly walked closer, his gaze calm and deadly. It's better for you not to know. The most interesting part is coming. Stay with us to find out how it all ends. In the meantime, like and subscribe to the channel so you don't lose it. Boston Central Park was Jackson's only refuge. Here, under the shade of an old oak tree, he could forget, if only for a moment, the weight of the world that pressed down on his shoulders. His tattered jacket did little to protect him from the biting autumn wind, but he was used to the cold. He had grown accustomed to many things in the last 3 years of homelessness. A sharp child's cry pulled him out of his reverie. Jackson looked up sharply. Not far from him, on the playground, a group of teenagers surrounded a small boy. The child was no more than 9 years old, his face pale with fear, and his hands clutched desperately to an expensive backpack, as if it were the last bastion of safety in a world that had suddenly become hostile. Please stop. The boy's trembling voice barely made it through the hooligan's taunts. Jackson gritted his teeth. His instinct for self-preservation told him to stay out of trouble. To stay out of trouble. But when the tallest of the teenagers, apparently the leader of the gang, roughly shoved the boy to the ground, something inside Jackson snapped. You think you're better than us because your daddy is rich? The leader mocked, kicking dirt in the child's face. The others laughed, daring him to continue. Jackson's heart was pounding in his chest. He knew that look in the bully's eyes, the same look he'd seen in the mirror when he was a teenager, angry, lost, and looking for an outlet for his rage. But this kid, he didn't deserve to be the target of someone else's anger. Without thinking, Jackson rose from his place under the tree and began walking toward the group. His steps were slow but determined, each one echoing in his mind as a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. Hey! Jackson shouted, his voice firm but calm. The hooligans did not hear him at once, too carried away by their cruel game. I said, hey! He repeated louder. The leader finally raised his head, his expression changing from amusement to irritation. What do you want, old man? He snorted, trying to hide his surprise behind bravado. Leave him alone, Jackson said, his eyes meeting the bullies in silent confrontation. Who's going to make us? One of the teenagers asked defiantly, although he took a step back, unsure of the stranger standing in front of them. Jackson didn't answer. He just stood there and looked at them, his gaze unwavering, as if testing their resolve. There was a moment of silence, and in that silence, the leader seemed to realize that this fight wasn't worth the risk. Let's get out of here, the leader muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. He turned away, the others reluctantly following him. This kid isn't worth it. Jackson watched them go, his muscles tense, until they were out of sight. Only then did he turn to the boy on the ground. Are you okay, baby? Jackson asked, his voice softening as he knelt down next to the child. The boy looked at him, eyes wide and filled with tears. He nodded, but his small body was still shaking. Jackson held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the boy took it, allowing Jackson to help him to his feet. Thank you, the boy whispered, clutching his backpack tightly to his chest. I didn't know what to do. No need to thank me, Jackson said, brushing some dirt off the boy's shoulder. These kids are just hooligans. They're not as tough as they think they are. The boy nodded again, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. My name is Alex, he said, his voice still shaking. Jackson, he replied, smiling slightly at the boy. You shouldn't be here alone. Where are your parents? My dad has to pick me up, Alex said, looking around nervously, as if expecting the bullies to return at any moment. Jackson looked around, only now noticing Alex's expensive clothes and the high-end backpack slung over his shoulder. This kid was from a completely different world, far from Jackson's reality, but at this moment, it didn't matter. Okay, Jackson said, his voice confident and reassuring. How about I wait with you until he gets here? Alex's eyes lit up at the offer, and he nodded eagerly. Jackson led him to the bench he had been sitting on earlier, and they sat together. The tension in the air slowly dissipated. They didn't talk much after that, but the silence was comfortable. Alex seemed to relax, just knowing that someone was there, someone who wouldn't let the bullies hurt him again. Jackson sat quietly watching the entrance to the park, half expecting trouble to come their way again. Minutes ticked by, and finally a shiny black SUV pulled up at the entrance to the park. Alex's face lit up, and he jumped to his feet. Jackson stood up as well, watching as a tall man in an impeccable suit stepped out of the car, his eyes immediately finding Alex. "Dad!" Alex shouted, rushing towards him. The man's stern face softened when he saw his son, and he knelt down to hug him. "Are you okay, Alex? What happened?" Alex pointed back at Jackson, who was now standing a few steps away from them, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "Dad, this is Jackson. He helped me when some guys were picking on me." Michael Stone, Alex's father, stood up and looked at Jackson, his expression tightening slightly. "Thank you for helping my son," he said, his tone polite but distant. Jackson nodded, meeting Michael's gaze for a moment before looking down at the ground. "I'm just glad he's okay." Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he put his hand on Alex's shoulder and began to guide him toward the car. "We have to go, Alex. Say goodbye." Alex looked back at Jackson, a slight sadness appearing on his face. "Bye, Jackson." "Thank you." "Take care, baby," Jackson replied, forcing a smile. He watched as they got into the car and drove away, leaving him alone in the park again. As the sound of the engine faded into the distance, Jackson exhaled and turned back to his spot under the tree. He sat up, pulling his jacket tighter around him as the autumn wind began to pick up. The world moved on, as it always did. But today, for a brief moment, Jackson had been able to make a difference. He leaned against the tree, closing his eyes. Tomorrow would be another fight, but at least now he had something to hold on to, a reminder that, despite everything, he could still do something good in this world. Jackson leaned against the bench, closing his eyes, listening to the rustling of leaves overhead. The adrenaline that had rushed through him during the confrontation was subsiding, leaving a dull ache in his bones. He hadn't been in the fight, but the tension of the moment, the memories that had surfaced, had left him exhausted. He thought the boy had driven off with his father without looking back, but instead he felt a presence next to him. Opening his eyes, he found Alex standing next to him, holding his backpack tightly, an uncertain look on his face. "Can I sit with you?" Alex asked, his voice quiet and uncertain. Jackson raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Shouldn't you be with your father?" Alex looked towards the entrance to the park where the car had gone. "He'll be back. He just needs to answer the call." Jackson nodded slowly. He wasn't used to people lingering after they'd gotten what they needed from him. But something in the boy's eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or gratitude, made it hard for Jackson to push him away. He shifted on the bench, making room for Alex. "Sure, kid," Jackson said, patting the spot next to him. "Sit down." Alex climbed onto the bench, his feet dangling off the ground. They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the park filling the space between them. Jackson was content to just sit, but he could feel the boy's eyes on him, as if Alex was trying to understand something he couldn't quite process. "Why did you help me?" Alex suddenly asked, breaking the silence. Jackson didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to explaining himself, especially to a child, but something about Alex's sincerity made him consider the question seriously. "Because you needed help," Jackson said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "No one should have to face this alone." Alex frowned as if trying to understand. "But you don't even know me." Jackson chuckled softly, the sound more like a sigh than a laugh. "You don't need to know the person for this. Sometimes it's enough to just be there." Alex seemed to consider this, his brows drawn together in thought. "Do you live here?" he asked, looking around as if expecting to see a house hidden among the trees. "In a way," Jackson answered, avoiding a direct question. "I come here often." Alex didn't press the issue, but Jackson could see his young mind at work. There was a sharpness in his gaze that reminded Jackson of himself at that age, always asking questions, always trying to understand the world. "Do you have children?" Alex asked, surprising Jackson again with his directness. "No, I don't," Jackson said, shaking his head. "I've never had a family in that sense." Alex tilted his head, curiosity shining in his eyes. "Why not?" Jackson hesitated, taken aback by the innocent question. How could he explain the choices, the mistakes, the twists of fate that had brought him to this point? He didn't want to burden the boy with his life story, which was filled with more lows than highs. "Life just didn't work out that way for me," Jackson said simply, hoping that would be enough. Alex seemed to sense that this was a topic best left untouched, and he nodded, his attention returning to the park. They sat quietly for a few minutes, the comfortable silence returning. After a while, Alex spoke again, his voice a little quieter. Do you ever get lonely, Jackson? Jackson blinked, taken aback by the question. Loneliness was something he was used to, something he rarely acknowledged even to himself. It was like an old coat he wore daily, frayed at the edges but familiar. Sometimes, Jackson admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But you get used to it. Alex didn't say anything right away. Instead, he put his backpack on his lap, fiddling with the lock. I get lonely sometimes, too, he said finally, his voice so quiet that Jackson could barely hear it. Jackson looked at the boy, surprised. Alex had a father who clearly cared about him, a life that seemed to be full of everything a child could need. But loneliness did not discriminate. It penetrated the hearts of rich and poor alike. Why do you feel lonely? Jackson asked softly, trying not to intrude too deeply. Alex shrugged, his eyes downcast. My dad is always busy. He is a lawyer, so he works a lot. I don't see him often. Jackson nodded, understanding more than he was letting on. He knew what it was like to want someone's time and attention, only to find that they were always just out of reach. It was a different kind of loneliness, but just as painful. But he cares about you, Jackson said, trying to offer some comfort. You can tell just by the way he rushed here when he heard you were in trouble. Alex smiled weakly at this, although the sadness did not completely leave his eyes. Yes, I know, but I wish he wasn't so busy all the time. Jackson had no solution to this. He couldn't tell the kid that everything would magically get better or that his dad would suddenly have more time. Life didn't work that way, and Jackson wasn't one to give false hope. Instead, he reached out and gently squeezed Alex's shoulder. You are a strong child. Don't forget that. Alex looked at Jackson, his eyes wide and searching. For a moment, it looked like he was about to say something, but before he could, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Michael Stone walked back toward them, his phone in his hand, the frown on his face softening when he saw Alex. He pocketed the phone and walked over to the bench, nodding politely to Jackson. Thanks for looking after him, Michael said, his tone still formal but less distant than before. No problem, Jackson replied, getting up from the bench. I'm just glad he's safe. Michael placed his hand on Alex's shoulder, guiding him off the bench. We have to go, Alex. Alex didn't move right away. He looked at Jackson, a question in his eyes, but whatever it was, he didn't ask. Instead, he simply nodded, his small hand taking his father's larger one. Will I see you again? Alex asked, his voice hopeful. Jackson glanced at Michael, who was watching him closely before turning to Alex. Maybe. Take care of yourself, okay? Alex smiled, a small, genuine smile before letting his father lead him away. Jackson watched them go, his heart a little lighter than before. As they walked away, Alex glanced over his shoulder and waved. Jackson raised his hand in return, a rare smile tugging at his lips. He stayed in the park until the sun sank below the horizon, the last traces of daylight fading. For the first time in a long time, Jackson felt like the loneliness he carried wasn't as heavy as it usually was. He had made a connection, however brief, with someone who saw him not as a homeless person, but as someone who had made a difference. And that, at least for now, was enough. Michael Stone gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing as he drove through the evening streets of Boston. Alex sat silently in the back seat, unusually thoughtful, his small face pressed against the cool glass of the window. Michael glanced at his son through the rearview mirror and felt his heart tighten with worry. Alex hadn't spoken a word since they left the park, and Michael knew something was bothering the boy. But what bothered Michael most was the image of Jackson, the man in shabby clothes, sitting with his son on a park bench as if they were old friends. The man's clothes were old and worn, his eyes tired and distant. Michael had seen people like this before, people living on the fringes, forgotten by society, struggling simply to survive. He had always been careful to keep his distance, to protect Alex from this world, not because he lacked compassion, but because it was a world full of dangers he couldn't always predict or control. Today, however, that very world collided with his own, and it troubled him in ways he didn't fully understand. Dad? Alex's voice broke the silence, pulling Michael out of his thoughts. Yeah, buddy? Michael replied, trying to sound as calm as possible, despite the flutter of anticipation in his chest. Why did we have to leave so quickly? Alex's voice was quiet, tinged with disappointment. Michael took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. I just didn't want to make you wait there. I know you've had a hard day. Alex didn't seem satisfied with the answer. He shifted in his seat, his small hands fiddling with the strap of his backpack. But Jackson was kind. He helped me when those kids were cruel. I know, Michael said, his tone softening, and I'm really grateful to him for that. Then why did you act like you didn't want me to talk to him? Alex's question hung in the air, the innocence behind it tightening Michael's chest. Michael hesitated, unsure how to explain his concerns to his son without sounding judgmental or unfair. He knew the world wasn't black and white, but as a father, his instinct was to protect, even if it meant erring on the side of caution. Alex, sometimes people we don't know can have their own problems, Michael began carefully. That doesn't mean they're bad, but we have to be careful, especially when we don't know much about them. Alex was silent for a few moments, processing his father's words. But you haven't even talked to him. How do you know he has problems? Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. Alex was a smart kid, sometimes too smart. It's not always about what people say, buddy. It's about what you can see. Jackson, well, he might be going through some tough times. I just want to make sure you're safe. But I was safe, Alex insisted, a note of disappointment in his voice. He was the only one who helped me when those boys were mean. He didn't even ask for anything in return. He just wanted to help. Michael frowned, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. Alex's words echoed in his head. It was true. Jackson hadn't asked for anything, had shown no signs of ulterior motives, but Michael couldn't shake the unease that remained, the protective instinct that flared whenever Alex was involved. They pulled up to their house, a large modern structure in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. The driveway was lined with neatly trimmed hedges, and the porch lights came on as they approached. Michael parked the car and turned to face Alex, who was still looking out the window. Look, Alex, Michael said softly. I'm not saying Jackson is a bad person. He may be a good person who just needs some help. But as your father, it's my job to make sure you're always safe, no matter what. Alex finally looked at his father, his eyes searching Michael's face. You're always working, Dad. You're not around often, but Jackson was there today. The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He knew Alex missed him, knew his demanding job often kept him away from home longer than he wanted, but hearing it from his son so simply and without accusation made it even more painful. Michael took a deep breath, his resolve softening. I know, buddy, and I'm sorry. I'll try to be around more, okay? Alex nodded, although the sadness in his eyes remained. Can we see Jackson again? Michael wasn't sure how to respond. On one hand, he wanted to respect Alex's feelings. Jackson had, after all, been there when his son needed help. On the other hand, Michael's instincts screamed at him to keep Alex away from potential risks. I'll think about it, Michael said, unwilling to make a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Let's go inside and have dinner, okay? Alex nodded again, his shoulders slumping slightly as he stepped out of the car. Michael followed, his thoughts heavy as they entered the house. The warmth and comfort of home usually brought him some sense of peace, but today the anxiety lingered. Dinner was quiet, the usual chatter replaced by a contemplative silence. Alex picked at his food, his mind clearly elsewhere. Michael tried to engage him in conversation, but the boy's responses were short, his thoughts still on Jackson and the events of the day. After dinner, Alex headed to his room, leaving Michael alone at the kitchen table. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the empty plate in front of him. His thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Gratitude toward Jackson for protecting Alex, concern about the man's intentions, and guilt for how he had handled the situation. He couldn't ignore the fact that Jackson had done what he himself had failed to do, be there for Alex when he needed someone. But Michael's defensiveness, his need to control the situation, had overshadowed his gratitude, and now he wondered if he'd done the right thing. Michael pushed away from his desk and walked into his office, where stacks of case files and legal papers cluttered his desk. His work was his life. He was good at it, respected for it, but it had also cost him time with his son, time he couldn't get back. He sat down at the table, opening one of the folders, but the words blurred before his eyes. All he could see was Alex's face, his disappointment, his longing for something Michael couldn't always provide. With a sigh, Michael closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. He knew he couldn't solve everything with work, and he couldn't protect Alex from every pain, but he could try to understand, to be there for his son in a way that didn't always come naturally to him. And maybe, just maybe, that meant giving Jackson a chance, a real chance, to prove that his intentions were as good as they seemed. Michael made a mental note to visit the park again, this time with an open mind. Maybe Jackson wasn't just a person in need, but someone who could teach them both something about kindness, about being there for each other in a world that often pulled them in different directions. The thought was unsettling, but it was also oddly comforting. For now it was enough to know that he could try. The next day arrived with clear blue skies, the kind of morning that seemed to beg for a walk. Michael could hear the birds chirping outside as he sat at the kitchen table, staring into his cup of coffee, deep in thought. Alex was upstairs, still getting ready. They were going to the park again today. Michael wrestled with a decision all week. His initial reluctance to bring Alex back to the park, to possibly meet Jackson again, gradually gave way to a sense of responsibility. Alex was right. Jackson had been there when it mattered. The least Michael could do was give the man a fair chance. He wasn't sure what he would tell Jackson if they saw him. The man had saved his son from harm, a duty Michael felt keenly, but there was also a wariness he couldn't quite shake. Michael had built his life on caution, carefully managing risks, whether in the courtroom or in his personal life. But today he was stepping out of that comfort zone, driven by a mixture of gratitude and the need to set an example for his son. "Dad, are we going?" Alex's voice interrupted Michael's thoughts. The boy stood at the foot of the stairs, his face aglow with anticipation. He had already put on his favorite baseball cap, his small backpack slung over one shoulder. Michael managed to smile, pushing his doubts to the background. "Yes, we are going. Let's go before it gets too hot." The drive to the park was quiet, but it wasn't the tense silence that had filled the car earlier in the week. Alex hummed softly to himself, his excitement palpable, while Michael focused on the road, his mind racing with what he might say if they ran into Jackson. When they arrived, the park was already bustling with activity. Families were out for walks. Children were running around the playground, and joggers were doing their laps. Michael scanned the area as they strolled, his eyes instinctively searching for the familiar figure he had seen a few days ago. "Do you think Jackson will be here?" Alex asked, his voice full of hope. Michael hesitated, not wanting to give Alex his hopes in vain. "Perhaps we will see." They wandered through the park, passing the spot where Alex had been picked on by the bullies. Michael felt a pang of guilt, remembering how quickly he had wanted to leave that day, to distance Alex from the whole situation. But seeing the park now, full of life and energy, he understood why Alex wanted to go back. There was something comforting about the familiarity of the place, even with the memories of what had happened. As they rounded a corner near a clump of trees, Michael spotted Jackson sitting on a bench, his posture relaxed but his eyes wary. He wore the same clothes as before, a threadbare jacket over a faded shirt, but there was a calm about him that had not been there when they first met. He seemed lost in thought, his gaze focused on something in the distance, until Alex's excited cry broke him out of his reverie. "Jackson!" Alex shouted, running towards the bench. Jackson looked up, surprise flashing across his face, followed by a smile that softened his features. He stood as Alex approached, crouching to meet the boy at eye level. "Hey, kid," Jackson said, his voice warm. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." Alex grinned, his face lighting up. "We came back to see you. Right, Dad?" Michael, who had been walking a few steps behind, caught up with them. He nodded, feeling a little awkward, but determined to get over it. "Yes, we thought we'd stop by the park again." Jackson straightened up, his expression wary as he met Michael's gaze. "I'm glad you did," he said simply. There was a pause, a moment when neither man seemed to know what to say. It was Alex who broke the silence, tugging at Jackson's arm. "Will you play ball with us?" Alex asked, his eyes wide with hope. Jackson looked at Michael, as if seeking his approval. Michael nodded slightly, offering a small smile. "Sure, if you want." Jackson's smile returned, more genuine this time. "Okay, but I warn you, I'm not as fast as I used to be." Alex laughed, already pulling a small baseball out of his backpack. He handed it to Jackson before running a few steps away, his excitement contagious. Michael watched as Jackson and Alex began tossing the ball back and forth, their laughter mixing with the sounds of the park. He stood back at first, watching the way Jackson interacted with his son. There was an ease to it, a natural rapport that Michael couldn't help but admire. Jackson was patient, supportive, never letting the ball sit on the ground for long. He treated Alex not just with kindness, but with a respect that Michael found himself appreciating more with each passing moment. "Why don't you join us?" Jackson called to Michael after a while, throwing the ball to him with a grin. Michael caught the ball, surprised by the invitation. He hadn't expected to be included so soon, but the sincere tone in Jackson's voice made it clear that the offer was genuine. Smiling, Michael got into the game, throwing the ball back to Alex, who caught it with a triumphant cry. The three of them played together, the tension that had hung between Michael and Jackson slowly dissipating as the game went on. There were no deep conversations, no penetrating questions, just the simple shared joy of playing ball. As he played, Michael found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in a long time. He was used to being in control, analyzing every situation from every angle. But here, in the warm sun, with his son's laughter filling the air, he let go of that need, if only for a moment. He realized that Jackson wasn't just a stranger who had saved his son. He was a man with his own story, his own struggles, and perhaps his own need for connection. After about an hour, they finally called it a day, all a little out of breath, but smiling. Alex was full of happiness, his earlier reserve completely gone. Michael could see how much this moment meant to him, how much he needed it. "Thanks for playing with us," Alex said as they walked back to the park entrance. "Anytime, baby," Jackson replied, ruffling Alex's hair. He turned to Michael, his tone shifting slightly. "And thank you for giving me a chance." Michael nodded, meeting Jackson's gaze. "I'm the one who should be thanking you for what you did for Alex. I wasn't sure at first, but now I see that you're a good man, Jackson." Jackson smiled, a faint trace of sadness in his eyes. "I've made my share of mistakes, Mr. Stone, but I'm trying to make up for them." Michael thought about it, feeling a twinge of understanding. Everyone had their battles, their regrets. Jackson's path had obviously been difficult, but it was a path he was still walking, still trying to find his way. "Maybe we can help each other," Michael said, the offer coming from a place he hadn't expected. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Jackson looked surprised, but there was gratitude in his eyes. "I appreciate it more than you know." They exchanged glances, a mutual understanding passing between them. It was not the beginning of a friendship, not yet, but it was the beginning of something, a bridge between two very different lives. As they parted, a final wave of Alex's hand, Michael felt a sense of peace settle over him. The doubts that had plagued him earlier were still there, but they were quieter now, overshadowed by the feeling that he had done the right thing. Jackson had protected his son when he couldn't, and now, in some small way, Michael had repaid that kindness. But more than that, he had shown Alex what it meant to trust, to give people a chance, even when it wasn't easy. And for this, Michael felt a pride that warmed him from within. As they drove home, Alex chatting happily in the back seat, Michael realized that today was more than just a return to the park. It was a step forward for all of them. Michael sat in his car, parked near the park, watching as Jackson prepared a place to sleep under a large oak tree. His heart sank at the knowledge that the man who had saved his son would be spending the night out in the open. The next morning, Michael strode into the office, determined. His colleagues did not immediately recognize the expression on his face. Not the typical business-like concentration of a seasoned lawyer, but something more human, more emotional. "Sarah," he said to his assistant, "I need you to arrange a meeting with Robert Hendricks as soon as possible." "The owner of the auto repair shop?" Sarah asked, surprised. "But you have a full day, Mr. Stone. The committee on—" "Cancel everything," Michael said firmly. "This is more important." An hour later, Michael was already sitting in the spacious office of Robert Hendricks, one of his longtime clients, the owner of the largest chain of auto repair shops in Boston. "Need a job for someone you don't even know?" Robert looked puzzled. "That's not like you, Michael. You've always been careful." Michael leaned forward, his gaze intense. "This man saved my son from bullies, Robert. Risked his own safety. And you know what? He didn't even ask for any thanks." "Are you sure he's competent?" Robert raised an eyebrow skeptically. "He said he used to be a mechanic." Michael paused. "Look, I'm not asking you to hire him without checking him out. Just give him a chance. Interview him." Robert rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Okay, I'll meet him for you. But there are no guarantees. Our workshop has high standards, and I need not only good mechanics, but also people I can trust around our customers' expensive cars." Michael felt a wave of relief wash over his body. "Thank you. Believe me, you won't regret it." Returning to the park, Michael found Jackson on the same bench. Alex had already run up to him, waving his arms happily, telling him something about school. Jackson listened with genuine interest, nodding and smiling. "Jackson," Michael came over, holding out his hand. "I have a proposition for you." Jackson looked warily at the outstretched hand before shaking it. What proposal? Work. At the auto repair shop, Michael took a business card out of his pocket. My client, Robert Hendricks, is expecting you for an interview tomorrow. Jackson looked stunned. Why are you doing this for me? Michael paused, watching Alex play on the court nearby. You saved my son, he said simply. And maybe I'm beginning to understand that sometimes people just need a chance. Jackson looked at the business card, his hands shaking slightly. I haven't had an official job for several years. I don't even have clean clothes for an interview. I took care of that too. Michael nodded toward his car. There's a suit in the trunk that should fit, and I can offer you a place to stay in my guest house until you get back on your feet. Jackson's eyes filled with tears, but he quickly blinked, hiding his emotions. I don't know what to say. Tell them you'll come for an interview. Michael allowed himself to smile. We'll figure out the rest as problems arise. Jackson clutched the business card in his hand as if it were the most valuable item in the world. I'll come. I promise I won't let you down. I know, Michael replied, and in that moment, he really knew. The evening was filled with bustle. The guest house, small but comfortable, was quickly prepared for Jackson. Alex could not contain his excitement, constantly running between the main house and the guest house, bringing books, toys, extra pillows. Do you think he'll like it here? Alex asked, helping Michael lay out fresh bed linen. I think so, Michael patted his son on the head. But remember, this is temporary. Jackson needs to find his own place in this world. But we'll help him, right? There was such sincere hope in Alex's eyes that Michael's heart sank. Yes, we will help him, Michael promised, as much as we can. When Jackson finally entered the guest house, his face expressed a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. This is too generous, he said, looking around the space. I am not accustomed to such kindness. Maybe it's time to get used to it. Michael put his hand on Jackson's shoulder. You deserve a second chance. We all do. That night they ate dinner together, conversation flowing easily, as if they had known each other for years rather than days. Alex beamed, finally getting the attention he had been missing. Michael watched his son interact with Jackson and felt something in his own heart begin to thaw. The day of the interview arrived too quickly. Jackson looked out of place in his suit, not quite the right size but presentable enough. His hands fiddled nervously with his tie. I don't know if I can do this, he admitted to Michael as they drove to the body shop. What if I screw it up? You won't screw it up, Michael said confidently. Just be yourself. Tell Robert about your experience as a mechanic. He values honesty and hard work. Hendricks's shop was huge, with dozens of lifts and mechanics milling about. Robert met them at the door, his large frame commanding respect, but his smile welcoming. You must be Jackson, he held out his hand. Michael told me a lot about you. Jackson shook hands hesitantly. I hope only good things. He said you saved his son, Robert led them inside. In my books, that makes you a good man, but I need to know if you're a good mechanic. The interview took place in a small office filled with trophies and certificates. Robert asked Jackson point blank about his background, his experiences, how he ended up on the streets. Jackson held nothing back. He talked about his mistakes, about the addiction that cost him everything, about the years he spent struggling to survive. But he also talked about his love of mechanics, about how he found solace in fixing broken things, even when his own life was broken. I can't promise I'm perfect, Jackson said, looking Robert straight in the eye. But I can promise I'll work harder than anyone else because I have something to prove. Not just to you, but to myself. Robert looked at him for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Michael, who stood by the door holding his breath. You know what, Jackson? Robert finally said. I believe you, and I'm willing to give you a chance. Jackson blinked, not believing his ears. You're hiring me. Today, for starters, Robert clarified. Show me what you can do today, and if you do well, you'll stay longer. I need to see your work with my own eyes. Michael watched as Jackson's shoulders straightened and something new appeared in his eyes. Hope. Thank you, Jackson said hoarsely. I won't let you down. Start Monday. Robert stood up, ending the meeting. And Jackson? Everyone deserves a second chance. Just don't blow yours. On the way back, Jackson sat silently, looking out the window at the city rushing past. It wasn't until they pulled up to Michael's house that he finally spoke. I don't know how to thank you. His voice was quiet but confident. You don't even really know me, but you're changing my life. Michael stopped the car and turned to face him. I know enough, and sometimes that's all you need. To see in a person not what he was, but what he can become. Alex met them at the door, his face glowing with anticipation. So, how is it? Did you get the job? Jackson smiled, the first real, genuine smile in a long time. Yes, baby, I got the job. Alex rushed towards him, wrapping his arms around his waist. I knew you could do it. Will you live with us? Will you have dinner with us every night? Michael placed his hand gently on his son's shoulder. Jackson will be staying in the guest house until he finds his own place, he explained. But yes, we can have dinner together. That evening, they sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Alex fell asleep between them, his head resting on Jackson's shoulder. You know, Michael said, watching his son, I always thought I was protecting him by keeping him away from the real world, from people I thought were risky. But maybe the true protection is teaching him to see the good in people, even when it's hard. Jackson nodded, careful not to wake Alex. I'm not perfect, Michael. I'm going to have bad days, days when the past weighs me down. I know, Michael looked at the horizon, but you're not alone anymore, and that changes everything. Jackson's first day at his new job was filled with nervousness and excitement. Michael insisted on driving him personally, and even Alex woke up early to wish him luck. You're going to be amazing, Jackson, Alex said, hugging him before leaving. The best mechanic in all of Boston. Jackson smiled, but Michael could see the tension in his eyes. Fear of failure, fear of disappointing the people who believed in him. Are you ready? Michael asked as they got into the car. Jackson took a deep breath, ready as never before. The workday was long and grueling. Jackson was assigned to work as an assistant to an experienced mechanic named Tony, a stern man with tattoos and a suspicious look. So you're the boss's friend, huh? Tony asked, handing Jackson the tools. I hope you know what you're doing, because I don't want any trouble. Jackson didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a wrench, leaned over the engine, and began to work. His hands moved confidently, despite years of lack of practice. By lunchtime, Tony was already looking at him differently. You really know your stuff, he admitted. Where did you learn to work on carburetors like that? My dad had an old Chevrolet, Jackson said, wiping his hands with a rag. He made me fix it every weekend. Said a real man should be able to fix something he broke. By the end of the day, Jackson was exhausted but inwardly jubilant. He had done it. The first day had been a success, and even Robert nodded his approval as he passed. Michael was waiting for him outside, his face a mixture of worry and hope. How did it go? Jackson allowed himself to smile, a real, wide smile. Good, really good. They drove home in comfortable silence until Jackson spoke again. You know, I've been thinking about this all day, about why you're doing all this for me, and I realized it wasn't just about helping Alex. Michael glanced at him briefly. What are you talking about? I think you saw something in me, Jackson said, looking straight ahead. Something that reminded you of yourself. Maybe not who you are now, but who you could have been if circumstances had been different. Michael gripped the steering wheel tighter, the truth in Jackson's words making his heart beat faster. Maybe you're right, he admitted. When I saw you with Alex, I didn't just see a homeless person. I saw a person who, despite his own problems, was willing to help a child. And it made me think about how often we judge people without knowing their stories. They pulled up to the house where Alex was waiting for them on the porch, bouncing with anticipation. So how was it? How was the first day? Did you fix a lot of cars? Jackson laughed, the first real laugh Michael had ever heard from him. A few, baby, but there will be more tomorrow. Over dinner, Jackson talked about his day, his co-workers, the cars he was fixing. Alex listened with wide eyes, asking questions that showed how attentive he was. Michael watched them, feeling something warm growing in his chest. Over the past few days, his home, which often seemed too quiet, too empty, had become filled with life and laughter. Dad told me you used to live on the streets, Alex said suddenly, his tone simple, non-judgmental. Was it scary? Jackson paused, his gaze meeting Michael's across the table. Yes, baby, sometimes it was very scary. But you know what? The scariest thing was not the cold or the hunger, but the feeling that no one needed you, that no one would notice if you disappeared, Alex thought, his small face serious. But now you are needed, by us, right, Dad? Michael felt his throat tighten with emotion. Yes, Alex, Jackson is needed now. After dinner, after Alex was put to bed, Michael and Jackson sat on the back porch watching the stars. "Your son is an amazing kid," Jackson said. "So open, so accepting. That's a rare quality." "He taught me a lot," Michael admitted. "I always thought it was my job to protect him from the world, but he showed me that sometimes the world isn't as scary as it seems." Jackson nodded, his gaze directed toward the sky. "You know what helped me survive on the streets? Small acts of kindness. A smile from a passerby, someone who looked into my eyes and not through me. It reminded me that I was still human, that I still existed." Michael thought for a moment. "I never thought about how easily we can pass by someone's pain without even realizing it." "Most people don't think about it," Jackson said, not bitterly, just stating a fact. "But you're different. You could have just said thank you and walked away, but you chose to help. That changes everything." "And that doesn't bother you?" Michael asked. "Accepting help?" Jackson smiled a little sadly. "It used to be embarrassing. Pride is a luxury you can't afford when you have nothing. But I'm learning to accept kindness as well as give it." They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Michael spoke again. "I have a proposition for you," he said, turning to Jackson. "When you get back on your feet, get a steady job, and find your place. I'd like you to be a part of our lives, not as a guest, but as a friend." Jackson looked shocked. "Are you sure? You barely know me." "I know enough." Michael extended his hand. "And Alex adores you." Jackson looked at the outstretched hand, and Michael could see the struggle in his eyes, the beard with distrust, with doubt, with fear that it might all disappear. "I'd like that," Jackson finally said, shaking Michael's hand. "To be a part of something, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." That night, lying in his bed in the guest house, Jackson stared at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. Just a week ago, he'd been sleeping under the stars, not knowing what the next day would bring. Now he had a job, a roof over his head, and most incredible of all, people who cared about him. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his life really was changing for the better. But not everything went smoothly. During lunch the next day, Jackson encountered a problem he had not foreseen. A group of mechanics were sitting at a table, laughing and talking. Jackson stood to the side, unsure whether to join them. "Hey, new guy!" one of them shouted, noticing him. "What are you, a friend of the boss? Did you get the job through connections?" Jackson felt his cheeks heat up. He didn't want any trouble, didn't want to start a conflict. "Just trying to make a living, like everyone else," he said, trying to remain calm. "Yes?" The mechanic stood up, coming closer. "Sure, but we heard something different. We heard you were homeless. What did you do to deserve special treatment?" "Leave him alone, Ray." Tony, who Jackson worked with, suddenly intervened. "The guy knows his stuff, and what difference does it make where he came from?" Ray didn't look impressed, but backed off. "Just keep an eye on your tool," he called over his shoulder. "Old habits die hard." Jackson clenched his fist but didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked outside, needing some fresh air. He didn't tell Michael about the incident when he picked him up after work. He didn't want to burden him with his problems, didn't want to seem ungrateful, but something in his face must have given him away. "What happened?" Michael asked as they drove home. "Nothing." Jackson shook his head. "Just tired." Michael didn't press the issue, but Jackson noticed him frown, clearly unconvinced by the answer. Alex was waiting for them at home with a surprise. He handed Jackson a drawing, simple but touching, depicting 3 little people holding hands. A tall one in a suit, obviously Michael, a small one, Alex, and a third one in work clothes, Jackson. "This is us," Alex announced proudly. "Our family." Jackson froze, staring at the drawing, his throat tightening with emotion. Family. The word that had been empty to him for so long suddenly took on real meaning. "That's wonderful, Alex," he said hoarsely. "I'll hang it in my room." Later that evening, after Alex had fallen asleep, Michael found Jackson on the porch, still looking at the drawing. "He's really taken to you," Michael said, sitting down next to him. "I don't deserve this," Jackson said quietly. "All of this." "Why do you say that?" Jackson sighed, finally deciding to be honest. "There were problems in the workshop today. Some of the guys weren't too happy to see a former homeless guy in their midst. They think I only got the job because of you." Michael frowned. "That's not true. Robert wouldn't have hired you if he didn't believe in your abilities." I know, Jackson said, looking off into the distance. But sometimes the past doesn't let go so easily. People look at me and see not what I'm trying to be, but what I was. Michael was silent for a moment, considering Jackson's words. You know, when I first saw you with Alex, I saw a homeless man too, he admitted. I was wary, worried. But then I saw how you treated him, how you listened to him, how you respected him. And I realized that judging a person based on their appearance or circumstances is the simplest and most erroneous thing we can do. Jackson turned to him, surprised by his honesty. Most people don't change their minds that easily. Maybe, Michael smiled, but I think people deserve a chance to show who they really are. And you prove it every day. The next morning, Jackson showed up at the shop early to calmly prepare for the day. When he got to his workstation, he was surprised to find that his tool cabinet had been broken into. Inside, there was chaos. Tools were scattered and some were clearly missing. What the heck, he muttered, starting to sort through the remaining tools. Problems? Ray's voice behind him made Jackson tense. Someone's been in my locker. Jackson turned, looking him straight in the eye. Do you have any idea who it might be? Ray shrugged, fake surprise on his face. I have no idea. Maybe you forgot them somewhere? Or, he lowered his voice, used them for other purposes? Jackson took a step forward, anger boiling in his chest. What do you mean? Nothing, Ray smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Just thinking out loud. Before Jackson could answer, Robert walked into the workshop, his loud voice echoing throughout the room. Good morning, guys. Ready to work? The day passed in tension. Jackson tried to concentrate on his work, but he felt the eyes of the other mechanics on him. He knew that Ray had spread some rumors, suspicions. Towards the end of the day, as the workshop began to empty, Robert called Jackson into his office. Everything okay? He asked without preamble. Tony said you had problems with the tools. Jackson hesitated. He didn't want to be a complainer, didn't want to cause more ill will. Just a little misunderstanding, he said. I'll sort it out. Robert looked at him for a long time, his eyes piercing. Jackson, I hired you because I believed you were a good mechanic, and so far you've proven me right. But my shop is no place for junk. If you're having problems, I want to know about it. Jackson took a deep breath. Some guys think I'm only here because of Michael. They don't think I deserve to work with them. And what do you think about this? I think they're entitled to their opinion, Jackson answered honestly. But I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to work, to prove that I can be useful. Robert nodded, as if that was exactly the answer he had expected. Okay, then keep doing what you're doing. Show them what you can do, not what they think you can do. What about the tools? I'll see to that, Robert smiled, but there was steel in his eyes. There's no room for thieves in my workshop from any direction. As Jackson walked out of the office, he saw Ray and several other mechanics watching him. He straightened up, meeting their gaze with new determination. He wasn't going to let them break his spirit, not after everything he'd been through. That evening, when Michael came to pick him up, Jackson told him everything that had happened. You should have told me earlier, Michael looked worried. I could have talked to Robert. No, Jackson said firmly. These are my problems, and I have to solve them myself. I don't want them to think I'm hiding behind your back. Michael studied his face, then nodded slowly. I respect that. But remember, you're not alone. If things get really bad, I'm here. I know. Jackson allowed himself a small smile. And that means a lot. When they pulled up to the house, Alex was already waiting on the porch, jumping up and down with impatience. Jackson, he shouted, rushing toward the car. I have a surprise for you. The surprise was a homemade sign for the guest house door, decorated with glitter and pictures of cars. Jackson's house was written in a child's shaky handwriting. This is officially your home now, Alex announced proudly. Dad and I made it today. Jackson felt a lump in his throat. He dropped to his knees to be level with Alex. This is the best present I've ever received, he said, hugging the boy. Thank you very much. Later, when Alex was already asleep, Michael and Jackson sat in the silence of the living room, each lost in their own thoughts. You know, Michael finally said, I always thought of home as a place, 4 walls and a roof. But ever since you came into our lives, I've come to realize that home is so much more. It's the people who make you better, who see the good in you, even when you doubt it. Jackson nodded, looking at the fire in the fireplace. I've been alone for so long that I've almost forgotten what it's like to belong to something, to be part of something bigger than yourself. And what's it like? Michael asked softly. Jackson looked at him, his eyes clear and sincere. It's like coming home after a very long journey. Scary, but at the same time, right. Michael raised his glass. For home, it doesn't matter where it is or what it looks like. It matters who you share it with. They clinked glasses, and in that moment, Jackson felt that maybe his long journey really was coming to an end. That maybe he had finally found a place he could call home. The next morning, Jackson woke up with a new determination. He was ready to face any challenges that might arise in the workshop. To his surprise, when he arrived at work, his toolbox was not only in order, but also full of new shiny tools. Robert said you deserved the best, Tony explained, noticing his surprise. And between you and me, he called everyone together last night after you left. Ray got a warning. One more outburst, and he's fired. Jackson didn't know what to say. He felt grateful, but also a little uneasy. He didn't want special treatment, didn't want to be seen as privileged. The day passed relatively quietly. Ray kept his distance, though his looks were still full of distrust. The other mechanics, however, began to treat Jackson with new respect, especially after he helped one of them solve a complicated electronic problem in an old Mustang. By the end of the day, Jackson felt more confident. Something had begun to change, not just in his life, but in how he saw himself. For the first time in years, he felt valued for his skills, rather than judged by his past. When Michael arrived to pick him up, Jackson was in high spirits. Did you have a good day? Michael asked, noticing the change in his manner. Better than expected, Jackson said of the new tools and how he's earned a little respect from his peers. Michael smiled, but something in his expression made Jackson wary. Did something happen? He asked. Michael hesitated, then sighed. I received a call today. I need to go to New York for 2 days. Important client, urgent matter. Jackson nodded, understanding that Michael's job required such travel. Don't worry, I'll look after Alex, he said without a second thought. Michael looked surprised. Would you do that? I usually hire a nanny, but Alex, he's not very good with strangers. Of course, Jackson felt a sudden warmth from the trust Michael was showing him. The baby and I will get along just fine. When they broke the news to Alex, his reaction was delighted. Jackson will be with me? It will be like a holiday. He jumped around the kitchen, his face shining with joy. Michael laughed, although Jackson noticed a hint of sadness in his eyes. Just 2 days, Tiger, and you must obey Jackson as well as me, understand? Got it. Alex nodded solemnly. The next morning was chaotic. Michael prepared to leave, repeating instructions about Alex's school, his schedule, his favorite foods, and emergency numbers. And if anything happens, call me anytime, he repeated, probably for the 3rd time. We'll get through this, Jackson said confidently. Right, buddy? Alex nodded vigorously, snuggling into Jackson's side. Dad's more worried than me, he whispered conspiratorially, making Jackson smile. After Michael left, Jackson and Alex settled into their own rhythm. Jackson dropped Alex off at school, then drove to work, arranging for a co-worker to drop him back in time to pick him up after school. The day in the workshop passed without incident, although Jackson noticed that Ray still watched him with some distaste. But that no longer bothered him. He had a job, he had a home, and most importantly, he had people who believed in him. When he picked Alex up from school, the boy was full of energy, talking about his day and what they would do that evening. Can we order pizza? Alex asked hopefully. Dad lets me sometimes on special days. Is today a special day? Jackson teased. Of course, Alex smiled broadly. You're my hero and I'm your assistant. We're like a team of superheroes. Jackson felt his heart clench at the pure, unconditional love this child offered him. How easily Alex trusted him. How natural it was for him to see the good in others. Pizza sounds great, he agreed, ruffling Alex's hair. The evening was filled with laughter, pizza, and board games. Jackson couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so carefree, so normal. As if this life, a life with a job, a home, and a family, could actually be his. When it was time for Alex to go to bed, the boy asked Jackson to read to him. Jackson settled down next to him on the bed, opening the children's book Alex had chosen. Jackson, Alex asked sleepily after the story ended, will you always be with us now? The question caught Jackson off guard. He chose his words carefully. I'll be here as long as your dad and you want me to be, he answered honestly. Good, Alex yawned, Because I want you to stay forever. Dad, too. He's been smiling more since you've been here. Jackson sat with Alex until the boy fell asleep, his small face peaceful in sleep. He walked carefully out of the room, overcome with emotions he couldn't quite understand. The second day followed a similar pattern, although at work Jackson noticed Ray acting more openly. I hear you're playing family with the Stones now, Ray said when they were alone. Convenient, isn't it? From homeless to accepted family member. I wonder what you did to ingratiate yourself with them so quickly. Jackson felt his blood boil, but he kept his cool. I didn't do anything, Ray. I was just there for the kid when he needed help. Sure, Ray chuckled skeptically. I just wonder what rich daddy will say when he finds out more about your past, about what you really did. Jackson froze. What are you talking about? Ray moved closer, lowering his voice. My brother has access to the police database. He checked you out. Not just any homeless person, but a former drug addict with a criminal record. I wonder if Mr. Stone knows about this. Does he know that he's trusting his precious son to a man who's been in jail for armed assault? Jackson felt the ground shift beneath his feet. It was true. The darkest part of his past. The one he hadn't told Michael. Not because he wanted to hide it, but because there had never been a good time to tell the whole story. It was a long time ago, he said hoarsely. I was a completely different person. People don't care about excuses, Ray shrugged. They care about facts. And the fact is, you were a convicted felon who's now playing babysitter to the kid of one of Boston's top lawyers. Doesn't that seem a little wrong? Jackson didn't answer. What could he say? Ray had been right about one thing. He should have told Michael the whole truth. But now that his past had come out like this, it looked like a deliberate cover-up. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jackson worked automatically, his mind filled with fears and doubts. What if Michael turned on him when he learned the truth? What if he no longer trusted him around Alex? When he picked Alex up from school, the boy immediately noticed that something was wrong. You look sad, Jackson, he said, his childish face frowning with worry. Is something wrong? Jackson tried to smile, but it came out forced. Just a rough day at work, kid. Nothing you have to worry about. But Alex wasn't so sure. He took Jackson's hand, his small fingers wrapped around the man's large, work-roughened fingers. When I'm sad, Dad hugs me and I feel better, he said seriously. Can I hug you? Jackson felt his throat tighten. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and dropped to his knees so Alex could wrap his arms around his neck. The warm, pure embrace of a child was like balm to his tortured soul. Thanks, baby, he whispered, releasing Alex. That really helped. They spent the evening together, doing Alex's homework, cooking dinner, and watching a children's movie of the boy's choosing. But Jackson's mind was elsewhere. He knew he had to tell Michael the truth, the whole truth, as soon as he got back. But part of him was afraid that it would mean the end of everything he had begun to build. Michael was due back the next day. Jackson woke up with a heavy heart, knowing that today might be his last day in this house. His last day with Alex and Michael. He dropped Alex off at school as usual, then drove to work. Ray was there, his smile too smug. Have you decided what to do, Jackson? He asked quietly so the others wouldn't hear. Or should I help you decide? Jackson looked him straight in the eyes. I'll tell Michael myself. I'm not hiding from my past. Oh, I'm sure, Ray nodded with mock seriousness. But you know, sometimes it's better to speed things up. I thought Mr. Stone should know who he was trusting his son with. So I left him a message. Jackson felt his heart stop. What did you do? I called him, Ray shrugged. Just as a concerned citizen. Told him about your interesting story. I'm sure he'll appreciate the information. Jackson barely restrained himself from lunging at Ray. Instead, he turned and headed for the exit. Hey, where are you going? Ray called after him. Your shift isn't over yet. But Jackson wasn't listening. He needed to get to Michael before he came home, before he decided Jackson was a threat to Alex. He needed to explain, to tell the whole story as it was, not Ray's distorted version. He took a taxi, spending almost all his savings, to get to the airport. Michael was due to fly in a few hours. Jackson waited in the arrivals area, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. When Michael finally appeared, his face was grim, his eyes intense. When he saw Jackson, he stopped abruptly. Jackson? What are you doing here? He asked, his voice clearly wary. Where's Alex? Why aren't you with him? Alex is safe at school, Jackson answered quickly, understanding Michael's concern. I told the teachers you'd be picking him up today. I need to talk to you urgently, Michael. Did you get a call this morning? Yes, Michael interrupted, his voice cold. I got a very interesting call about your past. Things you somehow forgot to mention. I can explain. Jackson took a step forward, but Michael retreated. It's not like he said. Yes, I had a criminal record, but... But what? Michael asked coldly. But you thought it didn't matter? That I shouldn't know I was leaving my son with a man who was convicted of violence? I would never hurt Alex. Jackson felt panic rising in his chest. You have to trust me. Trust? Michael laughed bitterly. How can I trust a man who hid such important information from me? I let you into my home, Jackson. I trusted you with my son. And I treasure that trust, Jackson insisted. Listen to me, please. Give me a chance to explain. Michael looked at him for a long time, struggling with himself. Finally, he nodded. Okay, explain. Jackson took a deep breath. It was 6 years ago. I was a drug addict, as you know. One night I was in a particularly bad place, going through severe withdrawal. I threatened a man with a knife, trying to take his wallet. He resisted, there was a struggle, and I stabbed him. Jackson closed his eyes for a moment, reliving the shame. He spent a week in the hospital. I was arrested at the scene and sentenced to 3 years for assault with a deadly weapon. In prison, I went to rehab and got sober. It was my lowest point, and I swore to myself that I would never hurt another person again. He looked Michael straight in the eyes. I'm not proud of my past, Michael. I regret the pain I caused, but I'm not that person anymore. I worked on myself every day for the last 6 years. I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. I tried to make up for what I did. Michael listened, his face impassive. Why the heck didn't you tell me this right away? Michael's voice trembled with suppressed emotion. I let you into my home. To my son. I was going to tell you, Jackson answered honestly, not looking away. But when? That first day, when you looked at me suspiciously in the park? Or when you reluctantly offered me the job? I knew I had to show you who I am now, not who I was. I wanted you to see the real me before you heard about my mistakes. And then, his voice faltered. Alex became attached to me. He looked at me like I mattered. I couldn't bear the thought of losing that. Losing both of you. You should have trusted me, Michael said quietly. But there was no longer any coldness in his voice. I'm a lawyer, Jackson. I understand that people make mistakes, that they can change. I know, Jackson hung his head. I was wrong not to tell you, and I'll understand if you want me to leave. Michael looked at him for a long time, struggling with himself. Finally, he sighed. I don't know what to do, Jackson. Part of me wants to believe you, to believe in the changes I've seen with my own eyes. But another part is afraid to risk Alex's safety. I understand, Jackson said quietly. And whatever you decide, I'll accept it. But before you decide, let me say one more thing. Alex, he changed me. You changed me. You showed me that I could be better than I was, that I still had a chance at redemption. Michael said nothing, but Jackson could see the struggle on his face. Let's go home, Michael finally said. We need to pick up Alex. The ride was silent, everyone lost in their own thoughts. Jackson didn't know what Michael had decided, didn't know if he would have another chance to prove that he was worthy of the trust that had been placed in him. When they pulled up to the school, Alex was already waiting, his little face beaming with joy when he saw his father's car. Dad! Jackson, he cried, rushing towards them. You're both here! Michael hugged his son, but his gaze was fixed on Jackson, studying his interaction with Alex. Jackson and I looked after each other while you were gone, Alex said excitedly. We ate pizza, and he helped me with my homework, and we watched movies, and... That sounds great, Tiger. Michael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Why don't you get in the car? We need to talk to Jackson. Alex frowned, sensing the tension between the adults. Is something wrong? He asked, his voice quieter. Is Jackson okay? It's okay, kid, Jackson hastened to assure him. Adults just need to talk about some things. No big deal. Alex didn't look convinced, but obediently got into the car, although he continued to watch them through the window. I have to think, Michael said when Alex couldn't hear them. What you said, it changes things, Jackson. I understand, Jackson nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. But I want you to know that no matter what you decide, I'm grateful for the chance you gave me, for showing me that I can still be a part of something good. Michael looked at him for a long time, then nodded. Let's go home. We'll decide this there. At home, Michael sent Alex upstairs to unpack while he and Jackson talked. The boy reluctantly complied, sending worried glances at Jackson. "I don't want you to go," he whispered to Jackson before heading up the stairs. "Please don't go." Jackson felt his heart break. He couldn't make a promise he might not be able to keep. "It'll be okay, baby," he said instead. "Don't worry." When Alex left, Michael turned to Jackson, his face serious. "I don't know if I can trust you after this, Jackson. I have to think about Alex's safety first." "I know," Jackson nodded, "and I respect that. I would never want Alex to be in danger." "But," Michael paused, his expression softening, "I've also seen how you've changed in this short time. I've seen how you treat Alex, how you care about him. And he loves you, Jackson. He already sees you as part of our family." Jackson felt hope, faint but growing. "What are you saying, Michael?" "I'm saying I don't trust easily," Michael said slowly. "But I believe in change. I believe people can become better if they're given a chance. And I'm willing to give you another chance, Jackson, as long as there are no more secrets between us." "No secrets," Jackson agreed immediately, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. "I swear, Michael, I'll do everything I can to justify your trust." Michael nodded, then extended his hand. "Then let's start over. No secrets, no past to haunt us, just a future we build together." Jackson took his hand, his own shaking with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for believing in me." At that moment, they both heard a noise on the stairs and turned to see Alex coming down, his face nervous. "Are you staying, Jackson?" he asked, his voice small and scared. Jackson looked at Michael, who nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Yes, baby," Jackson said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm staying." Alex's face lit up with joy, and he launched himself down, jumping straight into Jackson's arms, who caught him, spinning him around. "I knew it," Alex shouted happily. "I knew you would stay. Now we will always be together, right?" Jackson met Michael's eyes over Alex's shoulder, and in that moment there was an understanding between them, a silent vow, a promise to do everything he could for this little boy who loved them both so completely and unconditionally. "Yes, baby," Jackson said, hugging Alex tightly. "We'll always be together now." That evening, the three sat together in the living room, Alex between Michael and Jackson, his head resting on Jackson's shoulder as Michael read him a story. It was a picture Jackson had never dared to imagine for himself. Family, home, belonging. He knew there would be hardships ahead. His past was not gone, and there were people like Ray who didn't believe in change, didn't believe in redemption. But with Michael and Alex by his side, he felt like he could face anything. "Hey," Michael said quietly as Alex fell asleep between them. "Are you okay?" Jackson looked at the sleeping boy, then at Michael, the man who had given him a second chance not once but twice. "Yes," he said, and for the first time in a long time, it was the complete truth. "I'm fine. I'm home." The next morning when Jackson returned to the workshop, Ray was already waiting for him, his smile triumphant. "So," he said, crossing his arms, "I assume you're here to collect your things?" Jackson shook his head, calmly walking to his workstation. "No, Ray, I'm here to work, like always." Ray's smile faltered. "What? But Mr. Stone got my message. He should have kicked me out." Jackson looked at him calmly. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but Michael believes in me. He believes in my change, and that's all that matters." Ray looked stunned, then his face twisted into rage. "You can't just walk away from your past, Jackson. People don't change." "No, Ray," Jackson said quietly. "You don't want people to change, because if they could, you'd have to look at your own life and ask yourself why you're stuck in your hatred and bitterness." Ray opened his mouth, then closed it, at a loss for words. At that moment, the workshop door opened and Robert walked in, his gaze stern. "Ray," he called, "to my office, now." Ray gave Jackson one last nasty look, then followed Robert. Jackson didn't know what they were talking about, but when Ray came out of the office half an hour later, his face was pale. "What happened?" Tony asked, walking up to Jackson. "Ray looks like he's seen a ghost." "I don't know," Jackson answered honestly. "Maybe Robert finally saw his true face. You could blame him, you know," Tony said thoughtfully, "after he tried to sabotage you. But you didn't." Jackson shrugged. "Revenge never made anyone happier, Tony. I learned that the hard way." Tony looked at him with new respect. "You're a good man, Jackson." no matter what Ray or anyone else might say. Jackson smiled, feeling warm from the simple confession. Thank you, Tony. It means a lot. At the end of the day, Robert called Jackson into his office. To his surprise, Michael was already there, sitting next to each other, talking quietly. Jackson, Robert motioned for him to sit down. Michael told me about the incident with Ray, about his call, and how he tried to discredit you. Jackson tensed, not knowing what to expect. I also know about your past, Robert continued. Michael was completely honest with me. I understand if you want me to leave, Jackson began, but Robert raised his hand, stopping him. I don't believe in punishing people twice for the same crime, Jackson. You served your time. You made a mistake, and you paid for it. What I care about is who you are now. He looked at Michael, then back at Jackson. Michael thinks very highly of you. He says you've changed his life and his son's life. That tells me more about your character than a mistake you made in the past. Jackson felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, Robert smiled, truly warmly for the first time. You've earned your place here with your work and character. As for Ray, he's no longer working in this shop. I won't tolerate that kind of behavior from my employees. Jackson was surprised. You fired him because of me? No, Robert said firmly. I have suspended him for today and initiated disciplinary proceedings, Robert said firmly. His behavior does not align with the values of this company. We believe in honest work and mutual respect. What he did, digging into your past, sabotaging your workplace, and spreading rumors, is unacceptable in a professional environment. He stood up, holding out his hand. Welcome to the team, Jackson. For real. Jackson stood up, shaking Robert's hand, then Michael's hand, feeling his life changing again, transforming into something new and full of possibilities. As he and Michael drove home to Alex, who was waiting for them both, Jackson finally felt the nightmare of his past begin to recede. Not disappear entirely. That was a part of him, the part that had taught him the power of compassion and forgiveness, but recede, making room for hope and new beginnings. You know, Michael said, looking at him sideways, Alex asked me yesterday if you would stay with us forever. Jackson turned to face him sharply, his heart skipping a beat. Is it true? Michael nodded, his eyes filled with warmth. He said that you're like part of our family, that with you the house feels complete. And you know what? I agree with him. Jackson didn't know what to say. His throat was too tight with emotion. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything now, Michael said softly. This is a big step, but I want you to know I wouldn't be against it. If you wanted to be part of our family, really part of our family. Jackson felt tears welling up in his eyes. Not tears of sadness or fear, but tears of pure, unadulterated joy. I would like that, he whispered, more than anything in the world. Michael smiled, reaching out to squeeze Jackson's hand. Then welcome home, Jackson. Really home. When they pulled up to the house, Alex was already waiting on the porch, his face beaming with joy when he saw them both. He rushed down the steps, his arms wide open. Dad! Jackson! He shouted, rushing towards them. Jackson dropped to his knees, catching the boy in his arms, feeling the small arms wrap around his neck. He looked over Alex's shoulder at Michael, seeing the same promise, the same vow in his eyes. They were family, not related by blood, but by something much stronger. The choice to love each other, despite all the hardships, despite all the past mistakes. I love you, baby, Jackson whispered into Alex's hair. I'll always be here for you. Do you promise? Alex asked quietly, his voice full of hope and trust. Jackson looked at Michael, who nodded, his eyes full of emotion. I promise, Jackson said, hugging Alex tighter. We're family now, forever.